Sounds great. So obviously, yes, kitchen safety is huge. We're going to talk about mise en place, how you get set up for success in the kitchen, talk about kitchen safety, knife safety. We're going to do a little practical education on cutting an onion and trimming asparagus. And then we're going to have the soup on, make some garnish, saute, and get set up. Jen is going to share some of her insights about her approach to cooking. She likes to keep it simple, clean, and organic. We're going to talk about how important it is to clean as you go, how we can support local companies, and then we're going to close out our time with making some stock, blending our soup, and then plating and garnishing. So we have a full 45 minutes. Again, it's going to be delicious and it's going to be great. So we're excited to get started.
Yeah.
Considering we're not in the same room, Andi, you crushed it. Okay. So let's start with a term. It's a French culinary term that is as old as cooking is in France almost. And it's called mise en place. And what that term means is everything in its place. And so in order to be efficient in a kitchen, particularly in a commercial kitchen, we need to conserve time and our energy. Working in a commercial kitchen can be really grueling. And so to have things organized conserves both time and energy. So what this principle basically means is everything that you're going to need, put together. So my handy dandy videographer, who's my niece living with me on since Marquette's closed, is going to show you. I have gathered everything I'm going to need here. I've got all my tools out. I've got my recipe out. I've got my ingredients out. I've got my pots and pans out. And where we're going to start today is with kitchen safety. And that begins with the cutting board. So when I'm not using proteins, I prefer to use a wooden cutting board. And all of my kitchen tools were chosen with care. I've spent money on these things because they're going to last me a lifetime. I only have one of these cutting boards. I really only need one. So I use a wooden cutting board. And then if I don't have, if you put the cutting board on the counter, when you're going to use it, it's going to move around quite a bit. And that is not a safe environment for you to work in. So I've gone from, I will own my mistakes of the past. I used to go through paper towel like, I'm not even going to talk about how bad I was. But anyway, I now use reusable paper towel that's eco-friendly. This has been in my laundry about 6 times, and it's still good. So I want to dampen it. I put it on the counter first, and then you put your cutting board on top of it, and it doesn't move as much or as easily. So then we're going to talk about knife safety. You can use whatever knife you're comfortable with. This is called a chef's knife. This is what you're going to find in commercial kitchens. I learned this way. First, we're going to talk about why it's important to keep it safe. There is nothing more dangerous than a knife that is not sharp. You want your knife to be sharp. Now, professional knives, and you've seen it, right? And I could never do it. But this, dangerous to me. I wasn't effective at it. So I'm going to own the cook that I am. And I use this Wusthof knife sharpener, and it has 2 openings for sharpening. The first is coarse, and that's what you want to do first. And you start at the very back end of the blade, and you want to pull it towards you carefully, and always pay attention to what you're doing. Knives are great tools, but they're incredibly dangerous. So I'm going to do this about 10 times. And then I'm going to take it over to the fine side, and I'm going to do that a couple of times. And that will get the grittiness off the blade that was created from the coarse side. So that's going to go through a couple of times, just like that. Now we have a knife that's safe. So when using this knife, when you first learn to use this knife, the propensity, and I've seen it over and over again, is to use your index finger. And that is going to create the least stable cutting environment for you. You actually want to hold it with a grip like this. So my thumb and my index finger are actually on the blade. And that provides me, if you see if it's like a fulcrum, that provides me a counterpoint right in the middle of it so that I have really good solid control over this knife. So we're going to start by cutting onions. So for the recipe, I'm not big on measurements. I'm a savory cook. I'm not a baker. I own what I am. And so I'm going to tell you the simplest way to do this recipe. 1 quart of stock, 1 onion, 1 pound of asparagus, 1, 1, and 1. So these onions are a little small, and I like the flavor of the Vidalia onions, or any sweet Walla Walla. Any sweet onion is going to work for this. So what you want to do when you're cutting something round is you want to try to create flat surfaces for you to cut on. So we're going to make one cut. I'm holding it. We're going to make one cut straight down the middle, because I want to create a surface that's flat, not wobbly. Okay. So now I can cut off the top. I can peel it, that would help. I can cut off the top, I can cut off the bottom, and then that outer layer is gonna come right off. And sometimes, particularly with the sweet onions, you're gonna get these spots like this. You can either cut, well, this is the way I would do it. But you can also cut the pieces and then cut that off. So that's gone.
Hey, Jen,
this I'm not gonna put in my stock, but all of this I will.
we've got a quick question from Larry.
Use it for our garden stuff.
Sorry
Yes,
about that.
Andi.
We've got a quick question from Larry who wants to know if you need to wipe the blade after sharpening.
Yes. Did I know? It's not. It's the most proper way to do it. I'm really careful in my kitchen. I sanitize it a lot. So I'm not concerned about there to be any contamination. And when you put it through that fine part of the sharpener, it will take off the grit from it. But it's a great question, and it's probably something I should have done. So I'm going to turn my pot on at this point. I cook at home on a commercial stove with commercial gas. So you're going to see flames come out of mine that you're not likely to have at home. What you want to do is cook this on kind of a medium-high heat in your environment. So I'm going to do the other half of this onion and get that ready. I'm going to save my scraps for the stock that we're going to make second. Now I'm going to cut the onion. So because we're going to puree this, we don't have to be concerned about what these look like. We want a medium dice for this. Again, it's saving time and energy. I don't need to cut this fine. I don't need to spend the time nor energy to think about that. So I made 3 slices here, and now I'm going to cut it 3 ways, maybe 4 the other way. So there's that pile. Any other questions, Andi?
Not so far. I think everyone's enjoying watching the chop.
All right, and so we're going to do onion number 2. The other way to do it, if I weren't doing the demo for you, but again, don't try this at home. I am a professional and I'm used to doing it. When you're not here, I cut off the top, I cut off the bottom. I still have a flat surface now. Then again, you need to be pretty proficient with your knife skills to do this, but for those of you that are more advanced, I'll show you. Then I cut a slit in it, and then I just peel that outer ring around. Save the pieces for my stock. I cut it in half, and then I've got the same thing. Do what you're comfortable with always. I am just a guide. I'm no different than a recipe. Recipes are guides unless it's baking. So I have my onion ready to go. My pot is heating up. I think it was Andi was at the Galloping Gourmet back in the day. Hot pan, cold oil, food won't stick.
Yeah, I believe so.
Said.
I think so.
So there are a couple of ways to handle the asparagus. You can do this, and I had my little nephew in here, and he trimmed 3 pounds of asparagus for me last week like this, and to save this for my stock. Or what's most efficient is to assume that probably the bottom inch is going to be pretty woody and not something that you're going to want in your mouth, and just cut it off. So since we only have a half an hour, I'm going to go for efficiency as opposed to an activity and cut it off that way. We are going to choose, when I'm done with this, those that have the prettiest tops. And I'm going to cut that top off and save it. And then we are going to use that separately to garnish the soup when we're done. So I'm going to just pick about 6 or 7 of these that have more tender tops, and I'm just going to break off about the top inch. We're going to save those so I can show you a pretty way to garnish the soup when we are done with it. All right, my pan is getting hot. Sorry, Andi?
One quick question. Since asparagus is like on super sale right now, how well does it freeze?
I've never frozen it fresh or cooked, but I have frozen what I've made. So you could make a double batch of this soup and then freeze it. I'm also going to talk to you while I'm making a soup. That's not how we're going to eat it tonight. And I will talk to you about that when we get done with it. So in here, I'm going to put the equivalent, again, I'm not really good with measuring, but the equivalent of about 2 tablespoons of olive oil and the same of butter. This is a holdover from my husband. He loves soft butter. So in my kitchen, there's always a stick of butter that's sitting out that's soft. So I'm going to do about 2 tablespoons. That's going to go in there. You can hear it sizzling. And then I'm going to drop my onions. And then I'm going to cut my asparagus while that gets going. I like wooden spoons because I can use them. I can interchange between a pot. And if you have a non-stick skillet, it's not going to scratch your non-stick skillet surfaces. So I've got my onions in. I'm going to crank my heat a little bit because I want to make sure this is done for you by the time we're done. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the asparagus that I did with the onion. About 1-inch pieces sort of here. So it's a pretty rough medium chop. That's going to go in. And then the next thing I'm going to do is season this. In cooking, it's important to season things as you're adding them. So if I were to not season this soup and wait to season it until we were done with it and the stock had been added and everything else, it's kind of hard to play catch up. And I find that you end up adding far more than you need. And if you season it as you go reasonably, then you're going to end up with a product that has been seasoned to your taste and liking. So that's going to go in there. I'm going to give it a quick stir. I use, there's probably some reason why when you watch TV, all the labels are covered. But I like to promote what I like. So I use this coarse sea salt. You can get it from anywhere. I go to stores where I can mostly buy organic fruit and vegetables, as well as proteins that have been responsibly raised. And so Whole Foods is one place I go. Locally, I also go to the Outpost. I then put that sea salt. This is an OXO grinder. It's meant to grind pepper, and you can see it's really cool. It's got these about 5 dots up here, which will allow you to change the coarseness of the grind. So I put salt in this one, and I'm going to put about 5 or 6 twists of the salt. I was blessed with a friend who went to Turkey about 35 years ago who brought me back this pepper mill, and it's one of my most prized kitchen possessions. So I'm going to, this just has Penzeys. I like Penzeys 4 peppercorn blend. And so it's got whole peppercorns in it. There's white, green, pink, and black. It's just my personal preference. And I'm going to do about the same amount of pepper in here. So there's that. All right, I'm going to let this cook for a minute or two while I talk to you about other ways that we could arrive at exactly where we are. One of the first ways we could do, for me, cooking is all about adding flavor wherever and whenever I can. So I've also made this soup by first grilling the asparagus. And grilling it, you can see that it has a nice char on it, and that char is going to give this soup a very different flavor than just going in here with raw. I've also done it where I've taken my onions. I didn't do that for you today, but I've taken my onions and cut them in quarters, leaving the root end on the onion. And I've grilled the onions, which also will give it a completely different flavor. Raw onions versus a cooked onion going into a soup is going to taste different. So we've got the same basic ingredients, but we can make this taste completely differently by how we treat our raw ingredients before they go into the soup. And why not? In they go. So we will enjoy a little bit of both. All right, so Claire's going to come over and show you how the color of the asparagus has changed. So what's on the cutting board is the color we started with. And you can see that it's developing this really nice, almost sort of like a neon tinted color to it. And it's at this point that I'm going to dump my stock in here, and I'm going to use dried dill in it.
Looks delicious.
Claire. If Marquette doesn't work out for you, Claire, I think you have future as a videographer. Okay, so before I put my stock in, again, layering flavors. This is a very simple soup. We're essentially talking about 3 main ingredients: the onions, the asparagus, and the stock. So we want depth. We want, eating is sensory. We want our senses to be excited. We want, we need to feel like we've been satisfied. And so in this soup, I'm not going to use any cream. A lot of soups call for a lot more fat than I'm going to put in it, and I'm trying to eat heart healthy. So how do I replace that creamy feeling? I do that by layering all of these flavors, and then I don't need to add as much fat to it. So I'm going to put in about 1/3 of a cup of white wine. I'm using a dry Chardonnay, kind of a buttery one. That's going to go in there. I'm just going to turn my heat up, and I'm going to literally boil this. And what I'm doing is I'm cooking off the alcohol, and I wish you could smell it because I could eat it right now. It won't take long to cook it off. Basically, when you're cooking off the alcohol, it'll smell very alcohol-y immediately, and as the alcohol is burning off of it, that smell will be less intense. So I'm there. The next thing that's going to go in here is going to be my stock. So the next thing we're going to make is garbage stock. This is my garbage stock. This is not. That's a lie. That's my beets. This is my garbage stock. That was far too red to be garbage stock. Okay, this is my garbage stock that I made on Sunday. So this is the result. This is 1 quart of 4 that my pot yielded. And it's got a nice red color to it because I put some beet ends in here, and I also had some red cabbage that went in here. So 1 quart of stock is going to go into the soup. I'm going to keep it on high again. At this point, if I were you, I would turn this down to medium high until the soup was simmering. I would cover it and set it off to the side. But because we only have a half an hour, I'm going to continue to cook it on high and keep an eye on it so that we can finish it for you. You can see what the finished product's going to look like. All right, I'm going to switch burners on this. And we are going to talk about one of the garnishes for the soup. So I have a nonstick skillet. This is a pretty heavy one. I'm trying to get away from these and don't want to cast iron, but sometimes they're just great for what they are. So I've got this nonstick skillet. I'm going to put it on the burner. The heat's kind of medium high. And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut 2 things for you after I wash off my knife.
Well, you're watching.
Wearing a knife in the kitchen doesn't just protect your clothes, but it also gives you a place to put, so it's always handy. I've got a 2.5-year-old in my house, and it seems like my kitchen towels are of extreme amusement to him, and they disappear with regularity. So an apron's a great thing to use also just to keep your towel handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these tips in half the long way. So I end up with these beautiful little tendrils. It's a little time consuming. You want to get them cut right in half. So we're going to cut those in half. And if you've noticed how I cook, what I'm trying to do is demystify cooking for you. I don't use precise measurements. And I'm trying to help you understand that there's so very little to be afraid of in the kitchen if you're safe. So I've got the tendrils done. Then I'm going to cut up a shallot. Now, if you don't have shallots, it's okay. You could use a red onion. You could use green onions. Or you could skip the shallot piece. This will also go into what we're going to use for the garbage stock. And I'm going to peel off this outer layer just like I did with the onion. Now this is tricky. I am going to go for what's called a brunoise, which is a really, really tiny dice. You do not have to try to do this. You could go for a medium one, but for those of you who are interested, I'm going to show you how to get this. So I'm going to use my paring knife. I think it's a misnomer that you need 20 knives. My favorites are my chef knife, my paring knife, and a bread knife. So to cut this, if it were an onion, you want your palm on it. It's too small to do that, so I'll show you on the bigger piece. But you want to cut slices in it horizontally, and then you're going to cut slices in it vertically on the same end. And then what you're going to end up with are these little precious, teeny tiny pieces of shallot. So there we go. The rest I'm going to put in my stock. Since we aren't using a lot of fat, and butter does give you a certain richness in your mouth, I'm going to saute these things in butter. Not a lot, just about that much. Probably less than a teaspoon, maybe almost. Hot pan full of oil, we won't stick. You can hear it sizzling. In go the tendrils. How are we doing on time, Andi?
We are at 24 minutes after, so we're doing great.
So in go the tendrils and my shallot. Remember to season as you go along. Less here because there's less quantity. So we've got that going. I'm going to move that to a different burner, and we're going to start on stock. So we make stock in this house on Sunday, so I don't have a lot of vegetable peelings to show you. But what do we got in here? So I've got carrot peels, I've got mushroom stems, I've got red onion peels, I've got some scallions, and then everything that we added to it. Nothing that I put in here, I lied. I should have taken that sticker off. Nothing that we put in here is moldy or mushy. It all still, I would tell you, has integrity, so to speak. So this is as easy as it gets. In this pot, I'm going to, I'll fill it first. You're gonna get into trouble if you put water in it first and then put your garbage into it, because you probably will overestimate the amount of water that's gonna go in here. So this pot is about half the size of my normal pot. My guess is that this is going to be a pot this size, filled with about that many vegetables, is probably going to yield you a quart and a half. So it is going to go cold water. Now, if you've got any herbs left over, like let's say you've got a package of thyme and it's kind of towards the end of what would be fresh, you could throw fresh vegetables in here, fresh thyme in here, fresh herbs, but this is it. And you put it, I put it on a medium to low heat, and I let it simmer for about an hour. I let it cool down, I strain it, and then it becomes the stock that you saw in the jar. So not a lot of magic to that. Using all of those things is going to yield you with a really flavorful base from which to make anything from. So back to our soup, and we should be about done. Now the asparagus, we are. So the asparagus has completely changed color now. The onions are all translucent. When I opened it up, it was just a beautiful flavor. So there is our soup, and we are going to, I'm going to take a wine blender, and I'm going to puree this. All right, I didn't have all my mise en place out. If you do not own a wand blender, kind of like one of those creations like sliced white bread. One of the best things ever created for the kitchen. So if you don't have a wand blender, you can use a regular blender. Just be careful when you're blending hot liquids that you put your hand on top of the blender and a towel in between them so that you don't burn yourself. So it's going to get loud.
We've got a question from Larry about whether or not the stock needs refrigeration after it's made.
Stock need refrigeration. Sorry, does stock need refrigeration?
Stock does need refrigeration, and it'll last for up to.
Could you repeat that? How long will it last? Jesse and Deb will get to your questions in just a minute.
Okay, so we've got that pureed, and then what we're gonna do, so this is good to go, just as it is. So you can see that it's thick, it's pretty fibrous, which is all of the fiber and the great parts of the asparagus. If you want fancy, you want to take a strainer. This is called a chinois. You don't need it this fancy. I could easily, except I broke mine, I could have easily used this strainer, but I'm missing the handle, and with hot liquids, I always burn myself, so I'm gonna use my fancy one. But any strainer will do. And I'm gonna pour the soup through here, which is gonna take all the fiber out of it. If you happen to have a ladle, or you can use a wooden spoon to do this, and you just want to work it through here, and what you're going to get out of here is just going to be this beautiful, silky liquid that's our soup. So I told you that I was going to mention what we're going to do with this tonight. Well, I'm calling this a soup, and it certainly is. I've fed my household soup the last 2 nights, and I think I'm going to have a revolt and mutiny on the bounty if I give them soup one more night. So tonight, I am going to take this, and I'm going to use it as a sauce instead. And we're going to have a pasta dish with some fish and shrimp in it tonight. And that will be, this will make a great sauce for that pasta. So the reason why I don't strain it if I'm going to eat it as a soup is that I'm going to lose out on all of that wonderful fiber. All right, I will finish that later, but let's get this plated up so that you can see what it looks like. So if you wanted to add cream to it, you could, and you would do that at this point. Now, I'm pretty adept at doing this. I've got my 10,000 hours in, as Malcolm Gladwell says. You should taste this and test the seasoning before you serve it to anybody. I'm pretty good. Mine could actually use a touch more salt, so you can do that in here or in the pot. And then I'm going to take, now these aren't going to float because it's not as thick. I took out all the fiber, but I'm going to take my garnish and I'm going to put it in here, and it's going to kind of float. So now what this is going to look like is a little bit of a thinner soup, like a consomme. You could put a dollop of creme fraiche on here. You can put a dollop of sour cream on here. You can garnish it with some fresh dill. Dill and asparagus are wonderful. So you could chop up the dill like that, or you could just put a frond of dill on the top of it. And if you had a little dollop of what, that would also make it look nice. All right, Andi, how are we on time?
We're good on time. I've got a couple of questions if you have a moment to answer.
I'm ready.
Perfect. So this will be recorded, or it is being recorded, and it will be posted to answer the question about being able to watch this while people cook, which I think is a great idea. Jesse wants to know how long the stock will keep in the fridge. I know you answered, but you were blending at the time, so I think we missed that.
The stock will keep up to a week in the fridge, or up to 6 months in the freezer. And if you're going to put it in the freezer, I don't know if you noticed when I opened the stock jar, but I had it pretty full because I knew if you're going to freeze it, no matter what container you're putting it in, I would stop filling it at the bottom of this lip. So any container that you have, leave a good amount of space, because when things freeze, they get larger, and you don't want your jar to break or your lid to pop off. So if you were going to freeze it, make sure you underfill the jar.
Then I had one other question from someone who wants to know, do you keep it to room temperature before refrigerating or freezing in the jar, or do you seal it when hot? How are you handling it?
So when you put hot things in your refrigerator, what you're going to do is you're going to reduce the temperature of your refrigerator for everything in it. because there are no proteins in this, it is not something that is going to go bad if it sits out and cools down. And so with this vegetable stock, I would do this. If, you know, I mentioned in the recipe, you could add chicken bones into it. If you added chicken bones into it, then you would need to cool it down pretty quickly so it doesn't spoil on you. But for me, once this is done, I will leave this out probably for a couple of hours until it's almost room temperature cool. I'll put it in the jars, and then I'll put it into the refrigerator after that. In the restaurants or a commercial application, we have devices. You could use a water bottle that you, fill with water and freeze. And then one way to cool it down quickly would be to take that water bottle right from the freezer and dump it into your hot soup, and that'll start cooling the soup down. In a commercial application, we have these big gallon things that we freeze, and then it goes into our soup to cool it down, or a stock or a sauce.
And then one other question, is there any kind of wine that you would recommend against using in a soup like this?
I wouldn't use a sweet wine. I've used a red wine. Use what you have. The only wine I probably wouldn't use is a sweet wine, because it's just going to change the flavor of it. And I'm not big on, I wouldn't be, my mouth just doesn't like the idea of a sweet white wine with this particular soup. But any drier, fruity's fine. Fruity's different than sweet. Any drier white wine first. If you don't have white wine, use red wine. In my last session, I mentioned my all-time favorite cookbook. I know the authors. No, I do not get a commission nor a credit. But if you're looking to play around in the kitchen and cook more like I do and try to be less inhibited by or less afraid of making mistakes, this is one of the best books ever. You can open it up and find an ingredient. So here's pork. And it's going to tell you everything in the world that goes with pork. All the vegetables, all the fruits, all the herbs, all the spices, all the things that you could use for pork. So let's say you want to get adventurous and you want to cook pork tonight, but you don't have a recipe and you want to just try to figure it out on your own. This is a great resource if your mind doesn't put things together this way, to go to see, well, what goes with pork? What do I have? I know pork and applesauce, but maybe I'm going to do pork and bananas. I wouldn't do that. I don't know why bananas in mine, but
we're getting a couple more questions, including what the name of that cookbook is. Could you just hold the
cookbook is Culinary Artistry. And honestly, when I was in cooking school about 35 years ago, one of my fellow students gave it to me, and I don't refer to it that much anymore, but I do think it's one of the best books you can have as a reference in your cookbook library.
Great. And then another question, two actually. One is, could you use beer instead of wine in the soup?
Yeah, I do use beer a lot in soups, and you could absolutely do this with this. And I'm not as much of a beer geek as a lot of people are, but I can't imagine that there would be a beer that wouldn't go with this.
And then could you could you also can these soups in a pressure canner?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You could absolutely can this. I'm not big on canning because I'm freaked out about botulism. So I don't can for that reason, but I don't can, I come one step short of it. I cook it, I put it in canning jars, and I freeze it. But you could absolutely can this soup.
Great. And then I think we have just a couple minutes left. I'm going to kick it over to Wyatt to see if he has any questions in the Facebook stream.
We did not have any questions come through on the Facebook stream, just some similar questions around, if we'd be sending out the recipes, which, as we mentioned, we will be. That is all of that. Is there anything else that you wanted to share today?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm so grateful to be able to participate in this event with Mrs. B. I saw a question on here, will there be more? Yes, there will be more. And we're going to cross-list on the NEWaukee site, on Jennifer's blog, and then also on the MKE Food School. And we'll share the link to sign up for that. We've got other folks from the community who are sharing recipes. We're just doing a lot of joint sort of collaborative work to use the opportunity of creating magic in the kitchen to help us not only deal with any sense of isolation or the quarantine itself, but just preparing for how we might take some of these great lessons and apply them when we're all sort of, back in a public life again. So I just wanted to thank all of the folks who were here. It's been so fun to see the questions. I always love watching Jennifer cook and learn something every time and only wish that we could all share in that delicious soup. But Jennifer, why don't you give us some closing words, and thanks
Sure.
again for everything.
Thanks for joining me in my kitchen today. And I hope, if anything, that you take away from this is, if you have any fear or intimidation around the kitchen, I understand that, I do. But it's not, the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be doing it. And I encourage you to have fun unless you're baking. When you're baking, it is a science, but when you're making food that isn't baking, have fun. The worst that's gonna happen is you're gonna go, all right, I probably wouldn't eat that again. But you might really surprise yourself and say, wow, I love this combination of flavors together. Or I don't like the charred asparagus, Jennifer. I like it better just right in the pot. But play with things. Think about how you can change ingredients so that the final profile in your mouth, when you go to eat it and you see it and you smell it and you're putting it in your mouth, excites you. Food should be an exciting thing. And there are some of us who have extra time on our hands, and if you want to tackle kind of a beast or a monster, this is a great time to kind of do a dive into cooking and to get a little bit more comfortable in your own kitchens. Thanks for joining me today.
And
Thanks
I want to
so
say thank you, everyone, for joining us on NEWaukee's Cloud Cafe. For anyone watching, NEWaukee's Cloud Cafe is an online platform with a variety of programs like Quarantine Kitchen to connect with your people, your passions. And Cloud Cafe is only possible because of companies that are fostering belonging during this unprecedented time of isolation. This program is brought to you by Ginger Lazovik, Shorewest Realtors. If you're interested in supporting NEWaukee, if you are interested in following along with our programs or signing up with our newsletter, please visit NEWaukee.com. Thank you again so much to Jennifer and Andi for joining us today, and everyone have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks, Wyatt. Bye, everyone.